Welcome to the SAG-AFTRA Foundation, the business program. I'm Jazz Tangcay, Senior Artisans Editor at Variety. And before we're joined by our guests today, I want to let you know that the SAG-AFTRA Foundation is a nonprofit organization that relies entirely on donations to provide emergency assistance and free educational programs to SAG-AFTRA artists. This conversation is made possible thanks to the generosity of our supporters. Over the past year, the foundation has given over 6.5 million in COVID relief to more than 7,000 performers. If you are a SAG-AFTRA artist and need help, please ask for it. And if you can help, please give. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our panel today. With us, we have Meredith Scardino, Yahlin Chang, Laura Donney, Chuck Hayward, Jack Schaeffer, and our Lady J. Hello and welcome to you all.
Hi.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here. Congrats to you all on the Emmy nominations. But because this is SAG, I would love to hear from each of you how you got your start. Like, how did you end up in the writer's room? And Lady J, I'm going to start with you because your background was in music. So what was your journey?
My journey is one of desperation and need. I was making music and it wasn't going well. It was going all right. I was doing well as an accompanist, but I had always been writing. I had written, whether it was lyrics or operas when I was like 9 or, I had always been writing and creating, and I decided that I wanted to move into that landscape. So I started putting together a comedy act, which I don't know if I was saved from doing stand-up comedy or if stand-up was saved from me, but I met Joey Soloway as I was putting that act together. And so I had all this material, and Joey asked me if I could submit a short story because they were looking for a new writer on Transparent. So I wrote a short story and took a workshop on how to write for television. Joey assured me it was just easy and I didn't need to even worry about it. I found out not to be completely true. But after that, they invited me to join season 2 of The Writer's Room.
Love that story. Jack, what about for you? What's your story?
I wish I could say I started music. I wish I could say something really exciting like that. I did, theater in college, which obviously counts. And I sang and was terrible at it. I wanted to direct. That was sort of the start. And I went to film school for directing and always wrote so that I would have something to direct. Because nobody was just going to be like, hey, lady, come on over here and direct this thing. Mm-hmm. And so I right after film school, I made a feature that I wrote and directed, but had a very hard time getting more directing work off of that. And so I found myself writing and rewriting mostly. And I was in the feature space forever and was doing work at Marvel, and then was invited to pitch on one of their first TV shows. So I sort of slid in right at the top, which I recommend to everybody. Never be in a room and then just start. Which was horribly terrifying and intimidating, but ended up being great because I surrounded myself with wonderful people. So this is my first foray into television writing.
Amazing. Yahlin, what about for you? What's your career? Where did you begin?
I started as a magazine writer. So I wrote for Newsweek magazine for 6 years, but I sort of secretly harbored the desire and ambition to be a television writer the whole time because I just loved TV. That was how my family and I learned about America. We just would always get together and gather around the TV set and watch, every hour-long drama. And I specifically loved the hour-long drama format. I loved how it came into your living room every week and how the characters could grow over many episodes and many seasons. And so, I wrote some spec. I borrowed a book out of the library that said how to become a TV writer and said to write spec scripts. So I wrote A Party of Five. I wrote A Law and Order. I, probably emailed. I walked to the Writers Guild in New York and got a mimeographed copy of like all these agencies, and I wrote like 40 letters to 40 agencies and didn't ever hear anything. And then I finally like met a woman who had met an agent and he had passed on her, but I sent him my stuff and he was interested and he ended up signing me. And so in 2000 I started to be a TV writer, and then in 2002 I had to move from New York to LA because I got a job on ER. So that's how I ended up out here.
And Chuck, how did you get your first writing gig?
Begging and pleading and sort of like Lady J, had a lot of desperation there. My journey sort of started similarly to Jack's, where like I wanted to direct, and then I was writing stuff and was directing, but it stopped at college. So I didn't do any of that in the real world. And then once I got out here, I just toiled away. I was an assistant for 9 years at various places, production companies, TV shows, business affairs, like, you know, really varied experiences, which gave me a really interesting 360 view of the industry. All the time I was writing, and luckily, you know, I was able to convince people to take me on and you know, represent me. And then after a couple of years of going out for staffing meetings, I finally got hired on a show called Bent, which is a very short-lived NBC show that I still maintain is a fantastic show. And Tad Quill was the showrunner of that, and I will forever be in his debt for giving me my break.
Love that story. Laura?
Similarly to, it sounds like everyone so far is like starting as something and then it's sort of evolving. I did seriously go to acting school for college, and I graduated with that degree. And I was in New York, and I'm from Los Angeles, and I came back to LA, and I always knew I didn't have like whatever grit. I just didn't like being told like no based off of my like face and body. And I like knew quickly that like I was not that kind of strong. I would rather you like reject me for my brain and my heart. So I pivoted. And I got very lucky. A friend from NYU where I went connected me with a writing team, Joan Rader and Tony Phelan, who show ran Grey's Anatomy for a very long time. And they are wonderful, wonderful people, very much like became my work parents. And I was basically their assistant for 3 years in different capacities. I was a writer's PA on their show Doubt on CBS. And we was with them with the other assistant kind of in mini rooms, just developing stuff with them. And then at some point, I gave them a sample because I just wanted to get repped. And I did not get repped by their agent, but I did get them to want to produce my spec, and blah, blah, blah. Eventually, after a lot of lucky things, Freeform hired me to turn my pilot into a Christmas feature for them. So it's called Ghosting the Spirit of Christmas. It was on Freeform in 2019. It was a super amazing whirlwind of a year. And then Jack Schaeffer read the pilot version of that feature and hired me on WandaVision. And so that's how that happened. Lots of good people, I feel like, saying yes to me and me saying yes to things.
I love that. And we'll talk about having doors opened for you. But Meredith, I want to hear from you how you got your start.
Well, I moved to New York to go to grad school for painting, a very practical thing to do. And so I was at Parsons, and I always wanted to be a comedy writer, but I had no idea on earth how you got into it. But once I got to New York, it was like people were doing improv at, UCB and the Pit and all these places. And I started taking classes. And then I also started animating, being an animator, working for independent animators. And then I ended up writing some of those animated shorts. I worked for Comedy Central. And then my first job as a writer, where I was like, I'm a writer, was Best Week Ever on VH1. If you remember that, which was so fun.
Yes, ma'am.
All my UCB heroes that I would go sit in the audience and watch them and be like, oh my God, they're so hilarious. And I got to just write bits for all of them. And it was so fun. And then from there, I just ended up in late night. I went and I worked at Letterman. And then from there, I worked at the Colbert Report for 6 years before jumping to Kimmy Schmidt. So I had like a long late night career before I ended up in scripted.
Love that. Lady J, I want to jump to you for a second because, you know, going back, you mentioned Transparent. You were one of the first out trans writers in Hollywood in a writer's room. And, you know, that spotlight, you know, you shed spotlight on that, but talk about how that visibility, you know, has been rewarding to you in helping to tell, you know, diverse stories. And we'll talk about diverse representation and storylines in a moment, but what has that been like for you to tell the stories that you want to tell?
Well, my experiences with facing challenges because of who I am in the world and how people perceive me is what made me a writer. With music, I transitioned in 2005 and I lost everything. I lost all my work. The music world was not ready to hear what I had to say or the music I wanted to play. So I knew that talking about identity and educating had to be part of my work. And I started doing these shows in New York where I spoke in between the songs to, you know, break the tension in the room and to make fun of myself and all of that, and to also educate. And that eventually turned into my writing. So I had to follow where the world was at in order to find the opportunities that I wanted to have and experience the life that I wanted to have. And that led me to television. There are so many opportunities for voices because of how television is distributed. And because there are so many buyers right now, we're seeing a real increase of diversity. And the world, once our voices are heard, it feels like there's no going back because the world relates to that authenticity. So even though we're just at the beginning of this for trans folks, I do see such an improvement and hopefully many more opportunities to come.
Talk about the changes in the writers' room, like the diversity, the representation that you've all seen change over the years.
Yeah, no, I've noticed a very stark change from my beginning to now. I was usually, for the first, I think 4 shows I was on, I was always the only person of color. Sorry, I was always the only Black person, usually the only gay person. And if there was another gay person, there was one other. So there was a big burden of representation there, and sort of, excuse me, I think that a lot of stuff that I was pitching, my references weren't being understood by people. Just some of the baseline humor was just a little bit, it just came from such a different world than my, middle-aged white colleagues. And so I was like, this shit I say is funny. It makes my friends laugh all the time. And it was, I just wasn't getting that sort of traction, that sort of like, affirmation. And then Dear White People came along. And also, I'm sorry, the first 4 shows I worked on all got canceled after 1 season. So I didn't have the chance to like climb the ladder in the normal way. So once I got to Dear White People and I was one of many Black people in the room, one of many queer people in the room. And it had a freedom there that I had never experienced before. And it really helped my confidence be boosted. And I grew up around plenty of white people, straight people, all that. So I've never been uncomfortable around the majority, but I didn't realize how it felt like, it was like an HBCU writer's room, essentially. Like it felt like I got a chance to, just kind of, spread my wings, I feel like. So that change is not just about representation. It's about like allowing the people who are there to really do their best and be their best.
Anybody else want to add?
I mean, I'll just say that when I started, I was always the only woman in the room. Like, well, not always, but many times I was the only woman on staff. And now, and then when I jumped over to Kimmy Schmidt, it was like, there was 60%, the room was 60% female to male. And it's just, and also just a million different backgrounds and voices. And I think that's scripted, I feel like, especially. And I do think late night has come a long way. I mean, but it also has something to do with the fact that there's a lot of white guys hosting these shows. So it attracts a lot of, but I do think everybody's trying to do a better job. But in in scripted rooms especially, I think it's very obvious that you're writing from multiple perspectives. You're not writing just for the host. So you really want to stack your room with as many different perspectives as you possibly can. And it just improves. The show just is so much better as a result.
And talking about, that, and, when you're talking about different experiences, I think in Handmaid's Tale, when you're dealing with something like the separation of a mother from a child, if you've not had that experience, like what I know, the Handmaid's Tale, like the staff writers, you've gone out to United Nations and speaking to survivors, like talk about that research that you do so that you can tell that authentic story.
Yeah, I mean, the crazy thing about working on The Handmaid's Tale, when we do our research and we talk to UN consultants and international law experts, and it's that, like, sometimes we get dinged for being too bleak or too dark, and it is a very hard show to watch at times, for sure. But the crazy thing is that, first of all, nothing that happens to the women on our show has not happened to women. Like every atrocity has happened to women in history and throughout the world. And 80-90% of what we find out is happening to women we can't put on our show because it is too dark and it is too evil and horrible for our show, which is crazy. We really soft pedal it compared to what women are going through. And the other thing that's interesting is that a lot of these atrocities that we portray to women, they have happened to women throughout history and throughout the world, but generally to Black and brown women and to women in Yemen or the Congo, women who are victims of ISIS or the Taliban, Uyghurs in China. These things are happening all the time. In our show, it's sort of made relatable because it's happening to a blonde, white American woman. And so that seems horrifying. The idea of that is just horrifying. But of course, it was always horrifying whenever this stuff was happening to women anywhere, So that is both the privilege and burden of working on this show. But in a way, we feel like we are giving voice to or opening eyes to, the struggles that women have globally.
So how much since we're talking to actors out there, how much does your cast help evolve the script and the story that you're telling? Meredith, I'd love to hear in the case of Girls 5 Ever, where you've got this incredible cast, how the show that you started with last, I guess it was September, and where that ended off by the end of it and how that developed because of...
Yeah, I mean, our actors are such a big, huge part of the show. And I mean, like the creation of the show, I just feel like, from table read to seeing how they play different things, playing to their strengths. When I wrote the pilot, I wrote the pilot without knowing the cast. So when we cast Sarah Bareilles initially I wrote the show thinking like, hey, if we get like one of them out of the 4 that knows how to sing, we're pretty good. Because honestly, like some of the girl groups, that's what it's like. And then we got Sarah Bareilles, and then we got Renee Elise Goldsberry, and we were like, oh my God, we have real huge talent. And then also Busy Phillips and Paula Pell, while they're known for comedy, they're amazing singers too. So just the 4 of them, just tailoring the material to serve them as best we can. Once we got them on board, and just seeing like Renee being so funny whenever she has to sing a punchline, and you're just like, oh my God, now I just want to write like a million punchlines, but she has to sing. She's just so proud of her voice and so proud of being like, I'm Beyonce, but no one else knows it yet because no one's known it for all these years. And so she wants to, show off a lot. But our actors are just so integral to making also, it's an absurd, hyperbolic show. And so to have our actors be the kind of people that make these characters empathetic, feel real, I think they deserve a huge credit in making the show, taking it away from like cartoon land and rooting it into, even though it is a little bit in cartoon land, rooting it in the real world, so you care about them. I mean, I was shocked to be like in edit and stuff and being like, oh my God, I'm crying right. Like I'm crying right now because I really feel for them. And it doesn't always have to exist in the zing zang zoom comedy space all the time. Because really, to their credit, I mean, it's also nice that we're on a streamer, and you can give moments breath so that those kind of things can resonate with the audience, that maybe if you had to cut to 21 and a half minutes in a comedy, you might have to lose some of those. So I'm happy we get both, but I just can't believe the cast we have. It's like, I'm over the moon.
Can I piggyback on that for a second? There was an article in Variety the other day about how mini rooms are kind of creating a scarcity of future showrunners, because when you separate the writer's room from production, the writers aren't getting the experience on set to then one day themselves become showrunners. And I think that, to Meredith's point, when I've been on so many different shows where we find the actors' strengths, and we not only write, jokes to those strengths, we actually create storylines around those strengths. So to have those things be separated, it does also, I think, hurt the actors as much as it hurts the writers and the quality of the show. So I just wanted to put that out there. Like, I wish that was something that we could really move toward as an industry, is keeping that thing intact, because it keeps the pipelines flowing.
Love that. Well, I don't know. Does Zoom help make that better, or does that worsen things? May
I just say, here's what I think about Zoom. I think Zoom works. It's not the best way to do it. It's like you can strain spaghetti through a baseball hat, but it's like, is it the best way? That's how I feel about Zoom, where I'm like, I'll do it. I want to show. I'll take this opportunity and run with it, sprint with it. And I'm so excited, but Zoom, I wish I were in person with my writers.
I'll second that. One of the most important things to me in a writer's room is the camaraderie with the other writers and the exchange of ideas. And on Zoom, that just doesn't happen as much. You can't just eat pretzels and chocolate until an idea hits you, like in a real writer's room in person. And so for me, it's a lot harder, but it is nice that we were able to work through the pandemic because of Zoom.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think that, what we do, so much of what we do is about distilling authentic human behavior. And I think Zoom creates this filter where you can't see all people's micro expressions. In our room, there are a couple writers who are sort of on the shy side, and there's a handful of brilliant ideas in the show that made it to the screen because I could see them working something out, and I poked at them until they told me, So I just think it dulls my instrument. I think one of the things that I like to think that I do well is I can read the humans in front of me and sort of shape things based on the mood and the vibe and what's cooking and the texture. And Zoom is a bummer, but agreed, we're so lucky that we still can keep doing our jobs. The one thing I will say, the one benefit to Zoom is that it opened New York and LA and the world up to writers that I may never have met or worked with because I'm a New York person. So that's cool. I think that's cool.
It's also, it's been helpful because it alleviates a level of stress. I've been pitching over Zoom a lot, and my batting average is way better than it has been in person. And also on Zoom, you can't really tell how much I'm sweating because I'm so nervous. So that has been a really beneficial thing for me. So God bless Zoom. It kept us working.
Yeah. I wear so much more silk over Zoom than I do in the real life world.
Me too. Look how silky this is.
Oh my God.
So
my blouses are just getting trotted out all the time.
I'm wearing sweatpants.
Yeah, yep, there you go. That's all.
It's all Lululemon down here.
Yeah. It's the fashion mullet. It's business on top and then party on the bottom.
Silk blouse and sweatpants underneath, or shorts if it's an ultra humid day. I want to talk about the pressures of when you've got characters such as in the Marvel comic universe, Wanda and Vision already established, and you're coming in telling this fresh story. What were the pressures of propelling that story forward?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of pressure, but in terms of like working with the actors, and they were so ready for this opportunity to dig in with Wanda and Vision. They were so game and excited and invested, and they had been embodying these characters. I think it was 8 years or something that they had been living these stories and building all of this like intricate backstory inside of themselves and reading the comics. And so they showed up like ready to play and ready to be entirely present. And I just always felt like I just have so much respect for what they established, and that they have performed as well as they have inside of this like enormous mythology. And they, especially as a duo, Paul and Lindsay were always able to carve out these very like intimate, meaningful moments, like between the, pew pew and blast blast and stuff like that. And so I just like my default was to be like, tell me what you think and what you feel and like what feels right. And a lot of our work, Laura and Chuck and mine and the rest of our incredible team, like, it was a lot of the mythology and the puzzle of the show and like the turns and all that stuff. And then the meat, the grist of the grief and everything. But I didn't know Wanda, and I had a sense of Vision, but I really relied on them to fill that out. And Lizzie especially has this wonderful way of keeping you honest. Like I would have these like sort of speeches that were just kind of overblown, and she would be like, I don't think I would stand here for this long. You are correct. You would be blasting by now. So how do we make this like, one of the things she says a lot is like, I don't know if I'm standing here, then I just have egg on my face. And I'm like, let's keep the egg off that pretty face, girl. Like, how do we make this better?
I have to tell you guys from WandaVision that for my family, that was like true appointment viewing. And we have not felt that way about a show for a long time. First of all, it's a show that we could all watch together, my sons and I, and Matt Chapman actually lives a few blocks from me. And so I had like emailed him a little bit about it. He's the amazing director, producer. Anyway, he it just was so I loved it. I loved how you completely played with genres, how you were commenting on all these other TV shows. I thought it was just incredibly brilliant. And we would be like, wait, it's Wednesday. Okay, 2 more days. Next episode of WandaVision. And that's so great. I mean, especially because it's like, I work on a show that like, I don't let them watch, So it was just so great to like bond over. I mean, I just wanted to take a moment to like fangirl for you guys,
That's so nice.
Thank you. That's very nice. There's a lot of fangirl inside of me. I'm trying to be like, be professional, keep it together, Schaeffer.
Yeah. You guys have a really talented neighborhood. I want to move.
Yes.
I need to be a part of that vibe,
man. I was going to say, when you first heard Agatha All Along from the Lopez's, was it as much of an earworm for you as it was for the audience?
So we, in the room, and I would love to hear what Donney and Chuck have to say about this, but so I tasked every writer, they were all required to write their own theme songs, and then they had to, on the day that we did the writer's room table read, they had to sing it. That was my rule, which was the smartest thing I ever did. So Cam Squires, who wrote that episode, his was called That's So Agatha. And so I can never kind of unhear sweet Cam singing That's So Agatha. So then when the Lopez's made the chart topping, like Better Than Bieber track hit tune, of course I love it, it's amazing, and it's all these things, but like I also always have that other one running in my, do you guys feel the same way, where it's like, yeah, Agatha All Along's great, like obviously empirically, but I also still hear that other one?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I feel like Cam, especially, like just knowing Cam, like him having to, and I remember it's just this like bippity boppity, like That's So Agatha. And like he would have all these verses, and then like the rest of us like learned the chorus quite quickly and would like chime in with That's So Agatha. So like I honestly felt like if any song had a shot of getting to the final cut, it would have been Cam's. And that's what's so funny, because Agatha all along is stunning. And I feel like when we heard, and it's on my Spotify, like it'll come on and like, I'm like, what's this? Oh, right. But I think it makes sense that maybe the song that had maybe, and all the songs are great, but the song that maybe had the most potential then met its final form with the Lopez's, and like then you add Catherine Hahn and it's just like the game's over. But to watch it, because Jack obviously heard it before we heard it when the episode aired, so it was a really delightful moment, I think, for all of us to see. Yeah.
I want to go to Pose for a second, talking about actors, and we talked about your experience and bringing that to life through your words. Talk about how Billy Porter has been, he shared his story, like how working with that cast and their experiences helped form, especially the season finale of that series.
Well, Billy, speaking of actors who make the character, Billy's character, Pray Tell, was much smaller in the pilot, and he came in and swept everyone away. I had known him from his Broadway experience, but he's finally getting the credit that he deserves, which is amazing. And the same with the rest of our cast. MJ as Blanca, it's incredible. She's the first trans person to be nominated in a leading actor category. So it's incredible that she's up for leading actress. And so we began to write for those actors on the show and the characters. Like Dominique Jackson, for example, as Electra, I started writing for meme culture. When I would write her monologues, I knew that it was going to end up on Best of Grindr on Instagram. And so I wrote it for meme culture. So they each had their own talents that just shine so brightly, we couldn't deny them. And that came together in the final episode as well, when it came time to really address the future of our characters. We knew it was the last episode of the season, or of the series, and we wanted to let our audience know that we were going to be okay, that our cast was going to be okay. We know historically what happened. We know it was a very, very dark time with HIV/AIDS, but we wanted to put the message out there that just because our time on Earth is limited doesn't make it any less valuable, that when someone passes away from a pandemic, it doesn't mean that their life wasn't worth living. And so rather than leaning into the tragedy of Pray Tell's passing, we showed how his life extends through Blanca, and how Blanca is going to make it. And luckily, 1996, the meds started coming out. So we fast forwarded in time to 98 to let our audience know that she was going to be okay. And MJ Rodriguez, we knew she could handle that material. So we really went in far for that. And everyone as well in the cast most folks are from the ballroom community. The diversity on our show is record-breaking, and we were able to take those stories and incorporating them into the script because of the cast and the behind-the-scenes writers and directors and producers.
And a beautiful scene, in the ball is the final ballroom with the Diana Ross "Ain't No Man in High Enough." It is, MJ really shines as Blanca, and it's a beautiful moment between her and Pray Tell. Like, what was that like for you to see that moment come to life, just them dancing around in all that rain, recreating Diana Ross Central Park?
Well, the ballroom scenes are really hard to write because there aren't really that many categories. And so in order to keep it entertaining, we had to come up with all these categories. And we'd be like, girl, you take this ballroom scene. No, you take this. I don't want this scene. So I believe Stephen Canals wrote that one. And he did such an incredible job at it. It was incredible to watch because, first of all, it's MJ and Billy performing together. And they performed earlier in the series in episode 6 of season 1, but it was a ballad. So it was nice to see them fly free, and our costume department had so much fun with the pull-aways and then, of course, the rain. I'm always up for a stunt, and to have rain in a ballroom scene with glitter and heels and Billy Porter and MJ Rodriguez with Stephen Canals writing it, I was happier than I could ever be.
Yeah. Is there a moment for all of you out there that you're like, this was great to see from page to see it on screen? And it might have changed. You might not have written it either, but what's that moment for you, Meredith?
The moment that just immediately leaped into my head was the moment it's in the finale and they sing at Jingle Ball and they sing 4 stars. And part of the magic of that was also that, well, it was the culmination of like them all saying like yes to how absurd everything is, but still wanting to do it anyway and storming the stage. But when we were shooting it that day, like we were in this gorgeous theater, the King's Theater in Brooklyn, and our crew was there and they were on stage and the lighting, and it was like people were dancing in the crew was just dancing in the aisles, and there was like such joy in the room because it was also mid-pandemic. It was the closest any of us had gotten to like a release of a party, and people were like crying, people were dancing and laughing. It was just such a joyful expression of like the last, however many months that we were involved in it. And it was just exciting to like see the 4 of them up there shining and just being like, oh, I believe in them. And it was just very life affirming.
For me,
Yahlin, what was your?
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, every time I watch our actors at work, it is such a masterclass in acting. This year, I think we got 8 actors nominated, and, any of the multiple nominations in the supporting actor categories, and a couple that hadn't been nominated before were nominated again. And it's, for me, it just feels like it's a career high, really, to see these artists say my words. Like, it's an incredibly humbling experience, and it's such a privilege, and I just sit back and like watch them like a fan. One thing that comes to mind is sort of a long scene when Lizzie Moss, who plays June, our main character, finally gets to Canada and reunites with her husband after 7 years. The 2 of them, she's just saying she just feels so sorry because she doesn't have her daughter, and he has to say, OT, who does a great job playing her husband, just has this amazing moment where for 7 years, he's been waiting to say, like, I'm sorry, I tried to get you out. I tried to get Hannah, our daughter, out, and I couldn't, and I failed, and I'm sorry. And as much as I felt emotional when I was writing it, watching them do it it was just like an unbelievable experience. And then the other thing was there's this scene between Lizzie, who plays June, and Yvonne Strahovski, who plays Serena, in my episode, where June confronts Serena, sort of her torturer and her abuser, for the first time, and sort of screams in her face. And it was it's so cathartic because, for so many seasons, we saw June be abused by this woman. And so to be able to confront your abuser, and she goes really far. She says to her, that Serena's pregnant. And she says to her, do you know why God made you pregnant? So that when, he kills your baby inside your womb, you'll feel a fraction of the pain you caused us when you tore our children from our arms. And the way she said, it's just like gives me such chills. Like it was, and because of COVID, I was watching everything on a live stream on my computer. So it really was like watching TV. And I was just, staring at them, like texting the director. And I still sort of can't believe what they did. They're such storytellers. They're such brilliant, our whole cast, they're such brilliant actors, and they're such storytellers in their own right, so that they, I never had the feeling like I've had on other shows where you write a script and then at every step of the way you give in a little bit and you have to compromise. It's not exactly what you wanted and someone has a different idea. But on this show, like literally every step of the way, to like production design and props and the directors and the lighting, like everyone adds something. And so it becomes this sort of collaborative work of art that is so beyond what I ever imagined, where everybody is using their artistry to tell the story. And it's such a privilege and such a high. And it's like why I write, it's why it gives me such purpose. Like it's just the best thing ever,
Chuck, for you, what was your highlight to see come to life?
There are a bunch on this show. It's I think the way that the transition from the old sitcoms to the sort of Marvel, more traditional Marvel stuff, that was really exciting to see how that was pulled off. It was exciting to see how people got behind I was about to say Lizzie's, but Wanda's grief. That to me was really special. And I think the line, I always say this, the line in Donney's episode, what is grief if not love persevering, is I think one of the best lines in the history of television. And that was Laura and Jack and Laura Monti, our writer's assistant. And to me, that's probably the biggest one, because it allowed me to process some grief that I had this spring. And I would have, without that one simple line, it would have been a much more traumatic experience for me. But it gave me, you don't often watch a Marvel show on Disney Plus and be like, I'm going to get tools to be a more mentally healthy person. And that's what it did. So I think that's for sure my favorite part.
Laura, for you, what was your favorite?
I mean, I also have a lot. But I think a moment that, first I want to shout out all the opening credits, because those were the song's amazing, but also just I love a montage. If everything I wrote could be a montage, I'm this is the strongest tool we have. But so to see sort of these summaries of tone and character and these little bite-sized things were so, I thought they were so efficient and so satisfying. And so that was a delight. And then I'll embarrass myself because I don't actually know this little girl's name, but in my episode, a moment that really struck me, because when I wrote it on the page, I was like, bup, bup, bup. And then in the Sokovia scene where the flashback where little Wanda is watching the Dick Van Dyke Show with her family, it's the moment right before they're killed. The welling up of music and I think on the page it was just like young Wanda watches the Dick Van Dyke Show with her family. It's warm, it's loving, and the way the music and the just volleying back and forth between the Dick Van Dyke Show and this beaming girl's face, who is just probably the most content she may ever be again. And then the blast, I was so moved knowing what was about to happen at her joy. I thought it was so beautiful. And it was a moment that was meaningful in writing, but I think really sort of was really buoyed by that little actress and the music and the Dick Van Dyke Show.
Jack, for you, what was your favorite moment to see come to life?
I was really excited to see WandaVision have the fight that they have in episode 5. It was always an exciting prospect. In my mind, I was like, Wanda and Vision, but in a sitcom, but fighting, but they're superheroes. So they're in the sky and they want to blast each other, but they can't, because that's not okay. It just was I'm like, they're not going to really let me do this, are they? And then, they did, and they were so excited about it. And that scene culminates with, Evan Peters at the door, which was an idea that I had along with Mary Livanos, our executive producer, early on, and it was hard to sort of push that through. So that sort of that building to that moment was really exciting to see it happen on set, and then to sit on it for 2 years, felt like 10 years, but to just wait and don't let it be spoiled, and it's going to be really exciting. And then WandaVision saying goodbye at the end of the series was something that I sort of felt in my heart from the beginning, before there was even a room. It sort of felt like it was in my cells, and they just showed up. I mean, you all know what it's like when actors arrive with their full selves. Like they want it to be as transcendent as you wanted it to be when you put it on the page, and then you just like, it sort of sets sail away from you and becomes something even more sublime. So that was one of those moments for me.
Lady J, I realize I picked out a moment that I love in Pose, but what for you was your favorite moment to see come to life?
It's a combination of moments. The HIV storytelling and the fact that we were able to get that on the air and to touch so many people and educate our audiences meant the most to me. I have been HIV positive and a vocal advocate for people living with HIV/AIDS for almost 20 years. And the trauma that I went through 20 years ago is because of where society was and because of where medicine wasn't. And it felt like we had enough distance with Pose because medicine has caught up, where people aren't dying at the same rates. And if you're undetectable, you're also untransmittable. So it felt like there was a real safety in exploring this storytelling that wasn't there before. And to have audience receive it in a way that had the stigma removed, where they just saw these characters as being human beings struggling with something as simple as a virus. That was the first time I had seen something like that on screen. And for me, that's the moment I take away from Pose as being most proud of. But I want to hear your favorite moment.
My favorite moment?
Mm-hmm.
I think when Billy Praytell removes the makeup after the ballroom scene. It is such a powerful moment of what is about, of his journey. So
Thank
incredible.
Thank you.
To see that.
That's Stephen Canals wrote that scene, and he did a beautiful job.
Beautiful scene. I stopped. I went back to rewatch it, and you kind of have to stop because, like, do I want to go down when you're doing rewatches? Whether because, like, do I want to go down that path and make myself weep again? And to your point in this panel is like, the social media aspect of it. The shows dealt with grief. They dealt with HIV. You told stories that that have touched us all, and even through music. And Girls However that was still provided an escape for us during this pandemic. Did you all go down that rabbit hole of social media, which can be awful, and it can also be like, this show has given me this? Like, talk about that interaction.
I looked. Like, I don't know about you guys. I mean, I think there's a lot of people that maybe have more self-control, but I'm like, I want to know what people are saying, like good, bad, or ugly. And I'm happy it resonated. Like, I'm happy people found it. I'm happy people wanted to tweet about it. You read some things where people hate it and stuff, but you can, I don't know, for the most part, I feel like very lucky that it seems to mostly have resonated with people, or the people who wanted to find it, found it, and liked it. So those, kind of like, they slide off like a duck's back a little bit. I mean, I'm sure if they got a lot bigger, I would care a lot. But I don't know. I just think it's so exciting to have, when it's good, to have that kind of feedback. Immediate feedback, like to know people are connecting with, and just like passing little memes around with your characters talking. It's just so cool. Like, I'm sure back in 1985, when you had you just had to wait for the Emmys, I guess, or the Nielsen ratings,
or the Nielsen ratings,
it was
I guess your piles of money. The money was a lot better than
it was all numerical. But I agree with you. I think that the fan engagement over social media. I mean, I have to set boundaries for myself. Like, I don't have accounts because I'm not a good enough writer. If I used like my whole writing ability for tweeting, I wouldn't write anything good for my actual job. So
Save it.
I have to, I just need to, I take too long writing an email. Like it's a whole,
Me
it's a
too.
thing. I never anticipated, I never saw my life like this. Cause like we would, the show would drop at midnight on Thursday night, which we like, when they told me that, I was like, great. So people watch it on Friday. That's what happens. And then it turned into this thing where like people were like counting down, and there were memes about people being angry about waiting, which I then took to my therapist and was like, the episodes aren't long enough and I haven't provided enough. So you're not giving enough to the world is what we're doing in this session. But it was so exciting. And I felt I was like awash in gratitude that I had so much direct access to people's experience consuming something that we put so much like love and heart and pain and sweat and tears into. Like I've just found myself being like, I wish this for every creative on the planet, that you could feel all of it, and some of it was bad and some of it was upsetting, but like just to know that people care and are engaged. And it was peak quarantine. I actually had COVID when we premiered. So I was quarantining with my family, and it was very, very scary. And that we were like, that was the one bright spot, was looking at social media, like at 6 a.m. on a Friday. So I feel grateful and loved it. So that was a lot. I have a lot of feelings about that time.
It's amazing how much our fans are like, they're just they care so much. They're so invested in these, fictional characters and in these situations that don't exist in the real world. But, for us, I mean, I feel like I'm always such a downer, but, it's interesting. We have like a lot of like female fans, obviously, but a lot of like women who've grown up in like fundamentalist Christian societies in America, and they really, really relate to sort of the, oppression of women stories that we do. And what I realized too is that, like a lot of people have a lot of trauma, and it helps them somehow to watch stories about trauma. Like they recognize themselves, they recognize struggles that they've gone through, it really speaks to them in some way to see sort of a true version of their story unfolding before them that, gives these stories, the respect that they're due. I mean, I think like everybody has some sort of trauma, and I don't know, it's healing somehow to watch television that grapples with that, I think.
I agree. I think there's some, like, at its best, fandom is like just incredible catharsis, like group catharsis. Yeah. It's really, I agree. I think it's really special.
To that point specifically, like, I think even like to Chuck's point about your own grief, and like, I think in a lot of these shows, whatever kind of trauma or loss, or if it's, capital T trauma versus lowercase t, like there's so many different kinds of like heart hurt. And I think like when you see that on a screen, the thing for a fact is that somebody is acknowledging that feeling exists. So like the one thing that's true is that you are not the only person on the planet who has to hold this. And I think that's really powerful, because it's like, if nothing else, I'm not saying the pain's going to go away. I hope it does, or lessens or whatever, but like the not being alone. And I think especially for our show during COVID, and the insurrection happened, the election happened, like it was the darkest hour of COVID specifically till now. And it was like, I think so many people felt like their literal loss of human people was being ignored and was not being counted. And I feel like, I'm certain that must have felt similarly during when AIDS was first starting. And I mean, like, quite clearly people were not acknowledged, like the bare minimum of like, this is happening was not being said. And I feel like an amount of that was happening in COVID. And so I think and also for Handmaids, like that kind of trauma in those families, like in every community, there are people looking away when all you want is someone to be like, yes, I see your pain. And so I feel like when you see that on a screen, you're like, no matter what, a writer, an actor, a director, and an editor know this feeling. And that I think is, I don't know, I think it's really profound.
To your point, I found out what our audience didn't know via social media. The erasure of folks who died of HIV or HIV/AIDS, or the folks who were closeted about having HIV/AIDS, and their families, wrote that they had stomach cancer in their obituaries because of the shame and the stigma. I didn't realize the extent of the loss of information until I saw our audiences react, saying, "Did this really happen? Like, was it really like this?" It was almost like, "Grandma, tell me a story." Okay, kids, sit down. Let me tell you a story.
How much time do you have?
Exactly. So it was encouraging to know that we were filling a void, that we were remembering those that we lost, and social media was a huge part of that.
What an incredible, insightful conversation. We could go on, but sadly, we do have to wrap. So thank you, Lady J. Thank you, Jack Schaeffer. Thank you, Laura Donney. Thank you, Yahlin, Chang, Jack Hayward, and Meredith Scardino. Thank you so much for that incredible conversation. And on behalf of the SAG-AFTRA Foundation, I want to thank you all for sharing your experiences with your fellow performers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Thank you.